Hi, this is Dr. Carolyn Coker-Ross, bringing you the Inclusive Minds podcast. This podcast was inspired by the book of which I'm a co-editor, entitled Anti-Blackness and the Stories of Authentic Allies, Lived Experiences in the Fight Against Institutionalized Racism. If you're a psychologist, a social worker, an addiction professional, or a healthcare provider, or anyone who wants to broaden your horizons, then this podcast is for you. The goal of the podcast is to help you understand some of the more complex issues facing our culture today. My guests are experts in their fields, and we'll be talking about a wide array of topics, including cross-cultural issues, the intersection of race and trauma, social justice, and health inequities. They will be sharing both their lived experiences and their expert opinions. The goal is to give you a felt experience and to let you know that you're not alone in being confused by these complex issues. We want to provide nuanced information with context that will enable you to make your own decisions about these important topics. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Inclusive Minds podcast. Today, my guest is Dr. Camilla Nontra, and she's going to be talking with us about the chapter that she wrote for the book that I'm a co-editor of, Anti-Blackness and the Stories of Authentic Allies, Lived Experiences in the Fight Against Institutionalized Racism. Welcome to the show, Dr. Nontra.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Ross, for the invitation to talk about my chapter.
Well, let me tell everybody a little bit about you. Dr. Nontra is an associate professor of psychology at the University of Richmond and director of the Equity Research Lab with an affiliate role at Virginia Commonwealth University School of Medicine. A counseling psychologist specializing in behavioral medicine. Her work centers on physical and mental health among underserved and minoritized populations through a multicultural intersectional lens. Her research primarily examines psychosocial factors, health inequities, and mental health in end-stage organ disease and transplantation, with a particular focus on the experiences of Black kidney patients. She has published widely and is a frequent speaker on health equity and cultural influences on well-being. Sounds like you have an interesting career.
Yeah, thanks.
So your chapter in the book was Making Space When Black Voices Speak Their Truth. And in your chapter, you talk about, firstly, about social determinants of health. Can you just give a quick, overview of that for our listeners who may not be familiar with it?
Yeah, so social determinants of health, we like to think of them as where you live, the conditions in which you live. It could be where you go to school, where you worship. All of those have an influence on your health outcomes. A lot of us do not choose those things. And so, for example, if you grow up, if you're born into a family that is lower income and has low resources, that is going to influence your access to certain types of foods. It's going to influence your access to the best forms of education. And that in itself can determine your health outcomes.
Okay, great. Thank you. In your chapter, you say much of the psychological literature and theories established over multiple decades are saturated with Western educated, industrialized, rich, democratic samples, or the acronym is WEIRD, that center individualism, even though people of color make up the global majority. What's the significance of that statement? What does it mean when weird people are the center?
Yeah, so a lot of our research is very much, the people who are participating in research, especially in the field of psychology, but also in a lot of other fields. A lot of them fall under this criteria, right? So they tend to be Western, educated, rich, democratic, and
And male. And male.
yes, indeed, and male. And so when we are sampling this specific group of people and then we're generalizing to everyone,
Mhm.
that creates a problem because it reduces your ability to really understand the experiences of people who fall outside that category. So even if we think about people who are Western, who are not democratic or who are not educated, we don't even get to the core of their experiences because they don't fall under this category. From the standpoint of looking at the experiences of people of the global majority, a lot of them may not fall under this category too as well. So we're missing the nuances in their experiences. We're missing, for example, the fact that collectivism or collectivist values may be important to them. And
Mhm.
so if we have our findings that say, we come to these conclusions, we may not be getting the core of the picture.
Yeah. And I think a good example is how a lot of research, even in women's health, has been done on men, not women.
Mhm.
And within that, even has been done on white women, not Black women or other women of color. And so then when you generalize those experiences, as you say, they may not really have the same results. So thanks for illuminating that for us. So another, I love this quote from your chapter. It's just so it's perfect. You say in the chapter, our current practice of science is analogous to cooking, in which one prepares the main meal, everything Eurocentric, and then after that adds spices. In other words, the experiences of people of color for additional flavor. Can you say a little bit more about what it means to center marginalized voices rather than weird or Eurocentric voices?
Yeah, so, I use that analogy to hopefully help people understand what we mean by centering the experiences of, people of color or people who do not make the majority in any sense, whether it's power, but also in numbers. It's because if you think about making a stew, right, and you make the whole stew and you add a little bit of spice, you could potentially do without that spice, right? That spice is almost seen as like maybe it enhances your flavor a little bit, but then it's not an integral part of your stew. And so in the same way, when we create research, so if I have a research question and a lot of my questions are based on the experiences, for example, of middle class white women, I do not understand how it might look different. So Dr. Ross, you gave the example of even, especially in the medical field, we do see a lot of outcomes for women's health not being different because, traditionally we focus a lot of research on the experiences in men. And so this is the same thing when we look at maternal health, for example. We see that even though maternal health, when we compare outcomes in the US to other Western countries, we're doing well. But when we compare outcomes for Black women specifically, the rates are much lower and actually mirror outcomes for people from developing countries, right?
Yeah.
So if
But our outcomes for, white women are much lower than other Western
Yeah,
countries,
yes,
so
yes, yes,
which
and
is shocking,
yes.
given how much money we spend on, on healthcare in this
Mhm.
country. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
and so being able to have a better sense of why that is being able to get to the core of the experiences of people. And so, in the case of trying to understand why we have these varying outcomes, we know that from a biological standpoint, race is not a biological construct, right? It's a
Right.
social construct or a social political construct.
It's just made up,
Ye
basically.
yeah. Yes, and because, it changes, you could go from one country to another, so how you might identify in, the US it will look different from how you would identify in South Africa or maybe in Brazil, right? So that lets us know that it's not, that's just an example of why it's not a biological construct.
But the deepest example is on the DNA level. We're all 99.9% the same.
Yes.
So, that's the most compelling evidence that it's not a biological.
Exactly. So, when we think about the experiences of, using that example of maternal health, why are Black women having, much lower outcomes relative to white women? And so we have to think about things, social determinants of health. What is in the environment? What is in their experiences with the healthcare system? So doing quality research would be centering on their experiences, centering on, collecting a sample that's heavily focused on Black women, Black maternal health, trying to get not just, these like whether it's physiological measures, but also trying to look at things in the environment, things in the social environment that may be influenced in these poor outcomes.
Whether it be nutrition or education or access to care, et cetera. So, but I can just hear the pushback on that. So if you center experiences of women of color, aren't you leaving out the experiences of white women? Wouldn't that be the same thing? What's the advantage really? Because there really is an advantage to centering the experiences of people of color, especially in the maternity arena. What is the advantage of doing that?
Well, there are many advantages, and you can think of, for example, if you care about health outcomes and you care about having a healthy population, you
Mhm.
want to be able to take care of people who have the poorest health outcomes. Because a lot of the time, if you take care of those people, you're going to take care of everyone. You have a common
Exactly. Yeah.
sense.
And I think that's a really important point. If you design a system that takes care of people who are doing the worst, then of course that same design will affect even people who are doing the best even more. And I think that's what I think a lot of people don't understand. They feel like it's either we're in front or they're in front.
Hmm.
So, one of my colleagues made an example about, the disability movement,
Yeah.
how it
Yeah.
had changed the curbs.
Yes.
When you get to the a corner, they have, I forget what you call them now, but you have the curbs are flattened out so that someone in a wheelchair, for example, could. Well, he was saying he never thought about it until he had kids, and now it helps him because he's pushing a stroller
Hmm.
and it's a lot easier. Or, for myself, I had knee surgery. It was a lot easier to walk down those curbs with a cane or a little push, walker than it was before the disability movement helped us with that arena. So that's a great example of how everyone has benefited, even though those curbs were designed for people in, for example, with disabilities who are differently abled. So, yeah,
Yeah, exactly. That's a great example and one I had not
that's
heard of too
I
until
know. I thought it
recently.
was a great example too. I was like, "Oh my goodness, I forgot to ask him, where did you get that?" But
Yeah.
but anyway, he has 3 kids, I think, under the age of 5, so you can imagine he's
Yeah.
struggling with a lot of transportation issues,
Yeah.
especially living in New York, where I'm sure he has to get kids on and off subways and
Ooh,
walk a lot and all that stuff. So let's
yeah.
move on to talking a little bit more about the what you mentioned in the title of your chapter, which is making spaces when Black voices speak their truth. So why is it necessary to cultivate spaces in which Black voices can be heard?
I think in general, the experience of a lot of Black individuals is that they do not always have spaces that represent them, spaces that affirm them. You can think of even little things such as you walking into an office
Yeah.
and the pictures representative of you. Are the pictures representative of your culture? Are they representative of things that you grew up with? And so that's a simple example, but it makes a huge difference when you walk into a room and you're like, oh, I'm seen and I'm part of this space, and there's something that's welcoming about this space. So those things are really important because it allows Black people to have their experiences seen from their vantage point rather than being seen as a disadvantage. So when you are comparing somebody, and even like you use the example of you and I, Dr. Ross. So if I am trying to compare myself to you, so you
Mhm.
have, for example, a medical background, right? And I'm a psychologist, and I'm trying to compare, or somebody's comparing us and comparing our knowledge and comparing some of our experiences. That puts me at a disadvantage already because we do not have the same experiences. We do not have the same type of knowledge. So if you're talking about certain like medical terms, I'm just not going to know it.
But if you put me in a psychology room full of psychologists, then I'm at a disadvantage.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So you can think of it in that way, right? So Black people do not make the majority in this country. And so when they're in spaces, especially in predominantly white spaces, a lot of things that are that could affirm them may be missing. And so that does not allow them to be seen from their vantage point, but also it does not allow them to also experience, the comfort of just being in a space where you know that your experiences are valid or seen and valued by others.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I mean, I was one of a handful of Black medical students at the University of Michigan, and to be fair, they bent over backwards to try to make us feel at home in the best ways they could. Like we had, our own advisor who was an African American man who had been at the university for many years. We met as Black students together to discuss our challenges and so on. But in every other day where those things weren't happening, in every space in the medical school, I was one of a few who were in the
Mhm,
classroom, in the lab, in the anatomy suites, etc. And it was, I think, having grown up, during the end of Jim Crow and, going to
mhm,
school in all segregated schools, living in a
mhm,
Black community, growing up, and so on, it was definitely difficult to
mhm,
feel like I could, speak up or not show up as being perfect or the smartest one in the room or whatever
mhm,
to
yeah.
prove myself. So I'm sure, especially as younger people come up, being able to feel, as you say, validated or seen or heard is really important. Why is that so complicated to use Black voices? Why is it complicated?
So, in the chapter, I talk about a number of things that complicate it. So we do know that there are a lot of stereotypes associated with Black people. So whether it's a stereotype of being angry or the stereotype of being lazy, or, and I think you can speak to most people in the US and they are aware of some stereotype associated with Black individuals. And so it makes it really complex to use your voice, especially when there's something happening that does not feel right, feels unjust, because there are all these fears about what could come up. You
Do
might
you, do
say,
you do you mind telling the example of Sharon Osborne that you talk about in the
yeah,
chapter?
yeah,
Yeah.
yes. So use that example, and a lot of viewers are probably aware of that. So this happened when there was I think it was Piers. I keep forgetting his name, Piers uh,
Pierce Morgan.
Morgan. Yes, I want to
The
call him something
British
else.
the
Yes,
British, talk show guy, yeah,
yeah,
Piers
yes.
Morgan.
Piers Morgan. So he was criticizing Meghan Markle, had said some things, and so it was on the talk.
On
And
The
I
View.
Yeah. Oh, The View. Yes. So I believe it was in 2020. There had been this.
I have your chapter right here. Do you want me just to read that for you?
Sure, if that's easier.
Well, I'll just read the situation.
Okay.
So there was an encounter between Cheryl Underwood, who is African American, right?
Yes.
And then
Mhm.
Sharon Osborne, who we all know, on the television show The Talk in March of 2021. And Osborne became defensive as she challenged the notion that her friend, Piers Morgan, was racist based on his comment about Meghan Markle. So you can take it from there if you want.
Yes, yes. And so during that exchange, Osborne reprimanded Underwood, telling her not to cry and that she should be the one crying, and demanded that Cheryl educate her about racism. And
Mhm.
so during that encounter, it was a very, so I do not watch that show a lot, but I remember watching clips of it. And so during that encounter, it was very uncomfortable. And during the whole time, so there was another host who identifies as Black or African American as well. And they both remained calm, even though Osmond was the one who was like, kind of demanding something, demanding a response from them. And and also being demanding in the sense that she was asking them to teach her, to tell me if I'm wrong. So I use that example in the chapter because my hope is that a lot of people like me have seen that clip, and so it can be some form of a mental picture of what they experience, maybe like for a Black woman who, in that case, in many ways, Cheryl could have responded and been being upset and said, you don't get to demand that I teach you right now about racism. But instead, she was very calm and, seemed as if she was using a lot of regulation just to stay calm within that moment. The reason why I use this example is to get to a stereotype that a lot of us are aware of as the angry Black woman. And so that's a big fear of a lot of Black women because, even emotions that may not have anything to do with anger are associated with that stereotype, so some Black women will give some examples of, oh, they're just having like a day where they're not smiling, and people are like, oh, you're angry, and it's like, it's just my face.
Yeah. Or I'm just thinking of other things.
Exactly, exactly. And so, with a white woman, for example, who has the same facial expression, there isn't that stereotype associated with her, or she may be even allowed to be angry without that stereotype associated with her. And so for
Also, they felt that, or it looked like they were kind of protecting of her because they didn't respond in a way that maybe another white woman would have responded.
Yes,
They didn't lash back.
yes,
They didn't meet her level of, anger or upset or whatever.
yes,
And there's that sense that as people of color, we have to protect the feelings of, particularly white women. There's
yeah.
that trope about white women's tears, I think it's called.
Yes, yes. And yeah, so there are a lot of things going on in that dynamic. And it's, even though it's a small clip, it's just an example of why it can be really hard to use a person's Black voice,
Yeah.
because there's so many layers attached to you and using your voice in a way that another person doesn't have to worry about those things.
Okay. Yeah. What does it mean to weaponize Black courage, which was another concept you talked about in your chapter?
So, weaponizing Black courage is also thinking about, so you can think about it in the sense, first of all, it's complicated to use your voice.
Mhm.
And then when you do use your voice, there could be consequences.
Yeah.
even when you're speaking the truth, even when you're, talking about something that's unjust, there could be consequences. And so that's what I mean when I use the term weaponizing. That's what I'm referring to.
Mm.
And the consequences may seem, some of them may be big, some of them may be smaller, but whatever the case, there are consequences.
Like
And
you could lose your job. That's one
yeah,
consequence.
yeah,
Um, you could be reported
yeah.
saying something that somebody misinterprets or feels you don't have the right to say. What are some of the other consequences you've seen people?
Yeah, and even something small as you could lose a friendship, right? Which is, it might seem small, but relationships mean a lot to a lot of us, right?
Yeah.
So saying something, so if your friend is doing something that is unjust and having the courage to stand up to them, that may be threatening of your friendship. It may be threatening of your relationship. And then there may be times where there doesn't seem like there's this apparent consequence, but the maybe instances in which, for example, if you have a supervisor, they're almost like taking notes of some of the things you're saying, and
Yeah.
subconsciously, they may not even be doing it consciously. Subconsciously, they may be starting to use certain labels on you. Oh, so maybe this is a difficult person, or they seem to interrupt the space a lot, and
Mhm.
so that in itself could, for example, influence your review, and you may not get as positive of a review. So maybe you may not get fired, but you may not get a positive review, which influences your money, because that may influence your ability to get a promotion or to
Mhm.
get a raise.
Yeah. Okay, good. Well, so tell us what are some ways to create spaces for Black voices? Have you seen that happen in universities or in other settings where you have any examples of that?
Yeah, so I think in creating spaces, it's very important to, first of all, have some form of education about the fact that, what we've talked about already, in the sense that, there is courage needed for people to use their black voice. The history of this country, and Black people are susceptible to racism, different forms of racism. So I think when a lot of us think of racism, we think of the blatant racism, right? So
Right. Yeah.
somebody, maybe crossing the road because they see a Black man walking, or somebody saying, like, I don't want to sit next to you, I don't
Mhm.
want to touch your hand, or I don't want to give you certain services because you're Black.
Yeah. If I'm a Black doctor, a patient coming in saying, I don't want to see a Black doctor.
Yeah, exactly, exactly, exactly. But there's so many other forms of racism, and obviously we don't have time to go through the various forms, but there.
A monumental number of various forms of
Yes,
racism.
yes, yes, yes. So being aware of that. So things such as, a lot of people some people may have heard the term microaggressions,
Mhm.
right? So these are little slights that kind of, you can think of it as a
Paper
cutting
cut.
somebody a little bit at a time,
Yeah,
right?
like a paper cut,
Yeah,
but it
exactly.
still hurts.
It still hurts. And if
Yeah.
you get multiple paper cuts, it's gonna hurt real
You
bad.
could bleed to death.
Yeah. Um, and so I think being aware of that is kind of a starting point. Also, things such as advocating for proper compensation, in the work field, because again, we do see a lot of disparities in pay,
Mhm.
between Black employees and white employees. And especially we can see it among Black women sometimes.
Yeah.
Um, and so if you are somebody who's really hell, bent on creating an atmosphere in which people have a space that feel affirm an individual for the work they're doing, right?
Yeah.
Make sure that you're compensating them accurately. Make sure that when you're in a space, especially when there's just one Black person who's talking about their experiences, um, it's important that we listen, and we listen to hear and not to respond. Because a lot of us are naturally listen because we want to create a response quickly. But if you are truly invested in elevating Black voices, you listen carefully, and you engage in active listening so that you're better able to understand their experiences. Also, trust that they know their experiences better than you.
Okay, you have to give an example of that.
Well, for example, if so I think about the experience of maybe being like a Black student and going to like a faculty member and saying, oh, this I had this experience, whether it was with like an internship or whatever, where this person was behaving in this way towards me. It was really uncomfortable. So maybe they experienced a microaggression. Not dismissing it, right? So not saying, oh, they're
Oh,
fine.
they didn't mean that.
They didn't mean that.
Are
Yeah,
you sure you didn't misinterpret that?
exactly.
Maybe you're being too sensitive.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. So those
Exactly.
are the things that Black women and men face when they share their experience,
Yes.
that they're told, oh, that's not really what happened, you know?
Very much so. And
Yeah.
and that's shutting somebody down, right? Because then they're not going to come to tell you because you're basically diminishing their experience when especially when you don't have that experience.
Yeah, when your experience is what it is, it's true for you.
Yeah.
So we're living in challenging times. How do you think these challenging times have affected the ability for Black people to speak their truth and the space for Black people to speak their truth?
I think putting on my researcher hat, right? So I
Mm.
haven't done any research studies, but I can imagine that it has had a tremendous impact in ways that are not even apparent to me. For example, just the idea that we have certain words that have become taboo now, words that used to be a way of us getting closer to a space where people can feel affirmed in their experiences and also reduce some of the differences that we see that are unequal.
So you're talking about like DEI,
Yes,
it's,
yeah.
now
Um,
taboo. Yeah.
yeah.
Not just the words, but actual the practice of DEI.
Exactly, exactly. So a lot of this has become taboo now.
Mhm.
And what people fail to realize, especially going back to DEI, is DEI helps everybody. So going back to what we had talked about before,
About the
um,
curbs, the
yeah,
disability curbs, the
exactly.
same. Yeah.
That's all part of DEI. Thinking about the fact that, even being a mother and having a nursing station, that is
Mhm.
DEI.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And I think people don't think about that because, they may be focused on, oh, we're focusing on a specific group, and is that excluding the
Mhm.
rest of the people who do not fall within that group? But they don't see how it actually helps all of us.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so so all of these things have made it harder for Black individuals to be able to voice their complaints, to voice their experiences, to talk about the ways in which there may be inherent injustices in systems. And, I think years from now, I mean, who knows, maybe a decade from now or more, we'll have a sense of how deeply it has impacted us and
Mm.
impacted everyone for
Yes.
that matter.
Right. Thank you for that. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and I really enjoyed your chapter, and I hope other people will get the book and read more about this topic of creating spaces for Black voices. It's a wonderful topic, and I really have enjoyed speaking with you today. So thanks for being on the Inclusive Mind podcast.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ross, for the invitation.
You're very welcome. Thanks for listening. Please subscribe to the Inclusive Minds podcast so we can let you know when the next great guest comes on. The link to subscribe is in the caption below.